Welcome to Lifestyle by Design, helping you solve everyday challenges. I'm Karen Jacobs, a clinical professor at Boston University, an occupational therapist, and a Brookline Rotarian. And here's my co-host.
Hi, and I'm Andrea Calso from Brookline Interactive Group. It's the month of April, and in Boston, that means it's marathon time. And this year's marathon is marking the 1-year anniversary of a really momentous year last year for many reasons. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're very lucky to be joined by Marissa Osborne, an occupational therapist from Spaulding Rehabilitation Center. She's going to talk about her experiences working with some of the survivors, and also talk with us about occupational therapy because
it's Occupational Therapy Month. Thank you.
So we get a twofer this month.
Yeah, April. It's great.
So Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I heard that you have a promotion, so maybe you can tell us your job description at Spaulding.
Sure. So I am the occupational therapy practice leader on the comprehensive rehab program at Spaulding. And the comprehensive rehab program houses kind of a variety of patient populations, including people who have had burn injuries, people who have had orthopedic trauma-related injuries, people who have had elective orthopedic surgeries, so that kind of encompasses the musculoskeletal population, and also people who have had amputations for a variety of reasons. So we have a mixed bag on the 5th floor.
How long have you been at Spaulding?
Just over 7 years.
That's a long time.
It is, yeah. It's a great place to work and to care for people. And, yeah.
So take us back a year.
Sure.
And just tell us what happened.
So Spaulding, as you may know, was on Nashua Street by North Station for many years. And last year we were preparing to move to our new beautiful building located now in the Navy Yard in Charlestown. And everyone was anxiously anticipating the move and kind of nervous about it, I think, but also very excited. And there were many plans in place. So we had to move the entire hospital, one patient at a time, from Nashua Street over to Charlestown. And this was happening on April 27th of last year. And obviously, you know, several days prior, the marathon bombing occurred. And so that kind of threw a huge monkey wrench into our plans. And it created even more chaos than we had anticipated with the move. So on the day of the marathon, I was working, and we heard about the bombings, and we were all asked to kind of stay at the hospital, not knowing really what was going on, and to start helping by making beds, passing out meals, in anticipation for possibly the larger acute care hospitals having to unload and empty their beds into our facility. So that was obviously, kind of different for us as OTs, having to stay and help the nursing staff. And then, as we all know, the events kind of unraveled from there in the coming days. And during the next week, 10 days or so, we had 2 of the marathon survivors admitted to our old location on Nashua Street. And then on the 27th, we made the big move to the new building. And when that happened, the floodgates kind of opened. So the 5th floor ultimately ended up treating 32 of the marathon survivors.
Wow.
So at one time, all of the beds on the 5th floor were occupied by people who had been injured at the marathon. And what is a very open and welcoming building, especially to the community. We welcomed the residents of the Navy Yard into the building, into our cafeteria, and the 5th floor was on lockdown, and everyone on the floor was under an alias. So that was kind of a stressful thing.
Can I just ask?
Sure.
The alias was very interesting, what they ended up naming people.
Yeah.
I heard about that.
Yes.
Can you tell us, and who, I don't know who made that decision, but it was very interesting. And that was done because you didn't want the names to get out to the media?
Correct.
Is that
yeah,
what it was?
Correct. To the media and other people, there are all sorts of people, with well-intended people wanting to come and show their support to these, marathon survivors, but many of them were strangers, and we really need to respect the privacy of the patients. So they chose the admissions office, I think, chose a whole list of car makes and models and colors and went down every, we had ex-Mercury, ex-Volvo, ex-Honda, and these, this is how we identified these patients while there. So it was a stressful time because we were, becoming acclimated to our new building, learning, where to get supplies, where to even go, where the stairs were to get down to the cafeteria.
Right.
But in addition, we were, kind of in the midst of all of this tragedy and treating all of these people. So.
And when you do this treatment, it's not just the survivors, but it's their family, it's their whole lifestyle, and that really is your job as an occupational therapist. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more broadly about that and what that means when you're treating these patients.
Sure. So as an OT, it's really important, obviously, to treat the whole person. So you're not only treating the physical aspect of the injury, but you're also, paying attention, obviously, as Karen has probably mentioned before, the person's emotional state. You're addressing their leisure interests, things that are meaningful, purposeful to them in their daily lives, but that also extends to their support network, their family, their friends. And many of these people were accompanied by family and friends, at the marathon. So their support network was a witness to their injury. And then those people were the ones, in the waiting rooms in those days in the hospital, waiting to see, what the outcome of the injuries, would be. And then they're the ones that were home, preparing the home for people to be discharged. Was how am I going to make, my loved one's apartment accessible? Are they going to be able to return here? How do I need to help them when they get home? What am I going to have to do for them? Am I going to have to, make meals for them? Am I going to have to help them to bathe, help them to get dressed? So really kind of taking a look at the big picture is important, especially as an OT.
Yeah, and the family is so critical to someone's recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not just the person who was injured, but you really had a whole community that you were dealing with.
Right.
And the uniqueness of this was that the people who came to the hospital had experienced the same violence, the bombing, but how they interpreted it was different too, wasn't it?
Right, for
Can
sure.
you talk a little bit about what that was like? Because you treated quite a few people, but how they were reacting to it might have been different too.
Right, it definitely was different. I mean, you talk about the stages of grief or the stages of loss, and you saw people kind of at all different points in that recovery process and that continuum. Some people didn't want to talk about it. So, for example, we hosted a lot of groups for people, and we still do. We host a weekly support group for our patients who have limb loss, and some of the patients wanted nothing to do with the group. They just weren't ready to talk about it. Others, felt comfort in sharing their story and kind of bouncing ideas off of people and how they were going to cope when they got home. So it was kind of interesting to see the differences. But one thing that was nice, although everyone was different in their recovery and how they coped with things, everyone kind of came together, and there was a sense of community on the floor because they had experienced this, similar loss. Most of them had lost a limb, and if not, they had some sort of significant physical injury due to, the marathon bombing. So they had that all in common.
Did you find through this situation any positive coming out of it?
Sure.
Can you describe maybe some of the positives that were experienced?
I think that there's a lot of positive. I think that one thing is that, this has kind of given us an opportunity now to educate the community about limb loss, about prosthetics, about what it's like to live with an amputation, and the possibilities of recovery. I mean, some of these marathon survivors are doing things that they didn't even do beforehand, before their injury, because they're so motivated. Some are kayaking on Boston Harbor, participating in our pool groups that we're having, in the aquatic center now that we have at Spalding. So I think that it's a great opportunity, again, to kind of raise awareness and education around limb loss and the potential of the human spirit and the human body.
And you shared with us some pictures of some of the patients that you worked with. So I was wondering if we could
Sure.
talk a little bit on that and So we have this one here.
Yeah, so that's an example of one of the marathon survivors using one of our hand cycles. We have an adaptive sports program at Spalding, and we offer all sorts of things, like I mentioned, kayaking, canoeing, sailing, adapted tennis, and there's a cycling club that occurs every other week. And basically, the adaptive sports staff will allow any patient with any disability or ability to participate in whatever they'd like. If you want to do it, they'll find a way to adapt the bicycle, the canoe, whatever it is, so that people can get out there and have fun and feel like they're really participating in something that's fun and meaningful to them.
Well, it's interesting that you described that. My mom was at Spalding a few years ago, and I used to come over to visit, and it was when still on Nashua Street, and I used to love watching people on the Charles River,
Right.
With the kayaking in
Right.
particular. It was great people. It gave them a new sense of freedom
It's true.
and meaning,
Right.
because recreational activities are so important for people as well.
Right, absolutely. And a lot of people, not necessarily the marathon survivors, some of them, but a lot of the patients that we see have been in the hospital for long periods of time. So for instance, a burn survivor has been in the hospital for months and months and months, and then all of a sudden to be a part of this process, taking them out onto the harbor or the river at the time on Nashua Street and getting them outdoors, it's just really something to witness and experience. It's nice to see the joy that it brings to them.
It's great. It's great. Now you've got a couple more photos.
Yeah.
That is one of the marathon survivors. She threw out the first pitch at a Red Sox game.
Oh my.
And the PT tells the story that they practice throwing the ball and standing there, just prior to going on the field. The therapy sessions leading up to it, that's what they did in therapy. And I mean, that's a perfect example of occupational therapy, because that's something that it's functional, it's meaningful, and she was able to do it in front of a huge crowd at Fenway. So.
And it has sort of distinct value to her.
Yes. Yeah.
That's something she'll remember for the rest of her life.
Right.
It's really important. I think you've got another photo.
That's a picture of Becky, one of our OTs. She is, taking advantage of some of the beautiful outdoor space at our new building there and working on some standing balance with one of the marathon survivors outdoors. And we're lucky to have that space. We have all sorts of different surfaces for people to practice walking on, and it's a great place to utilize as a therapist.
So in a way, Becky's working on community mobility with him, being able to understand that local community so that when he goes back home, he'll be able to navigate his own home,
Right.
his surrounding areas.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and an activity like that, working on standing balance, even though you're outdoors, that can carry over to the kitchen sink, standing at the kitchen sink having to cut up your vegetables to, make dinner, or standing at the bathroom sink having to brush your teeth. So it's functional, it's, in importance.
And meaningful to the person too, to be able to do that. Do we have another photo?
Same person.
Same person, but that's a good photo.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great one. So in this one, what's Becky doing here?
I think that's just kind of a great symbol of the bond that we form with all of our patients, and there was a special bond, I'd say, between a lot of the therapists and the marathon survivors, being that it was a younger population. A lot of people, including myself, truly identified with the survivors, and so a lot of people have remained friends with the people, with the marathon survivors, and it's nice. It's something special.
So I want to segue into something now, because you discussed that people have stayed friends. Let's look at all of the people who took care of the people who were injured. What was that like? Were there supports for, the OTs, the PTs, everybody, the nursing staff, the physicians?
There was some support. We had some debriefings, things like that. We really leaned on each other for support, as we do normally. If you can't think of a treatment idea with a particularly challenging patient, we go to each other and we help to brainstorm. But it was definitely a time of stress for all of us. One of the main reasons I would say was what I mentioned, how we could really identify with these patients. It was easy to look at them and say that could have been me, or that could have been my sister or my significant other. And I think that for many of us, I know for myself, typically we have a caseload of about 4 or 5 patients, and maybe one of them has experienced a trauma, and the remainder of them have elective surgeries, things as not as traumatic. And but at this time, because we had all marathon survivors on the floor, we had 4 or 5 people that had experienced a significant trauma, and they were going through so much, and it was a lot to think about. What do I need to do with this person? How am I going to get them to their home? How am I going to get them back inside their home and getting back to doing things that they want to do, and to think about that for every single person that you're working with was a lot. So for myself, it wasn't until maybe the summer, like 3 or 4 months into it, where my husband actually said to me, he says, "You need to stop. You're not sleeping, you're not thinking of yourself. You need to start, really reflecting a little bit on this and taking care of yourself." And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what have I been doing? What, the past 3 or 4 months have been a blur. And it really was. It was very, very stressful, because I think as OTs, as therapists, as in general, as nurses, we give so much to our patients, and we were at the time, we were doing our job and we were doing it well, but it was important that we had to take care of ourselves too.
And that's really important. That's going to segue into our marathon this year. We're going to have the marathon shortly.
Right.
And you have been preparing for the marathon.
I have been, yes. I'm going to be running. It's interesting, something you had mentioned earlier in our discussion about some of the destigmatization of the injuries a lot of the survivors have faced, the therapy process. One thing that as runners, as a team, we have thought about is, we're likely to see some of these people in public. We already have at some other races, because some are participating in one way or another. And it's raised an interesting question for us, is now that we're getting closer, obviously they're in the media more, and people are focusing on it more. So we actually had a collective question as a group about what's the proper etiquette and social etiquette, and how do we best also support them when we do see them? Because I think that there is going to be that sense of, obviously, excitement the day of, but also to be respectful, because we've all experienced it, and they've experienced it in a much more personal way in some ways.
I think that it's important to remember that these people are survivors,
Yes.
I'm conscious of calling them marathon survivors. They've survived a tremendous amount of trauma. And I think that although the 1-year anniversary brings up a lot of emotions, and it's people are remembering last year, but I also think that it's a time to kind of celebrate how far these marathon survivors have come in their recovery. It's been quite a year. Again, many of these people are back to life, and they're really thriving and doing well. So I think that they all deserve to be congratulated and encouraged to continue to move on and to get back to doing things that are important to them in their lives.
That's great.
Great.
That's really wonderful. So we'll all be at the marathon, so it's really celebrating their lives.
Right, I agree.
Yeah. So that's really good advice for your team.
Yeah.
Tell us about your team.
Well, I'm running on Team Brookline. It's the official charity for the town of Brookline. There's a number of ways that charity runners can come by their bibs, and Boston Marathon is unique in that you either qualify by a time or you run for a charity. Not anyone can sign up, and charities are either organized. They get their numbers through the BAA, which is the organizing group of the marathon, or through John Hancock, which also distributes numbers, and then also other organizations such as towns who receive numbers. And there's actually a lot of different charities. I don't even know the number. So Team Brookline is a representation of the town of Brookline, and there's actually 4 individual charities that runners will fundraise for. So the structure, I think, is really unique, because as runners we have a team identity that's really wonderful. We are running for the town of Brookline. We are all affiliated in Brookline either by living here or working here, have families, children in the schools. So everyone has a really deep connection to the town. And then we're fundraising for charities that mean a lot to the town and to us as individuals. So we have the Education Foundation, the Public Library Foundation, the Teen Center, and the Community Mental Health Center. And all of these organizations work really hard to both support their runners and work in the community. So it's really interesting to be in this sort of multi-charity situation because you learn a lot more about the town. You learn a lot more about the team members because we're all coming in from different backgrounds and desires. But for the most part, it's because we want to support these charities and we want to run a marathon.
That's great. Now, so you want to run the marathon. What has it been like to prepare for it?
It's a long process, and the day of the marathon is long, but the training process is longer. It's often described by our coach as many mini marathons along the way. It's usually between a 4 and 6 month process, depending on when you start and who you run with and sort of what your goals are and what you can accomplish. Our particular team has been training for the last 6 months, which is a bit longer than some. I'm glad we are because it really does give you that extra time to prepare. And many of us, because actually a lot of people on the team are pretty new to running and distance running. For a lot of us, it's only our first or second marathon. There's a lot that you have to train your body to do, and you have to start and build your way up. It doesn't happen overnight, truly. So it's really just learning how to run really long distances, and it's a lot of learning how to eat properly, and really to manage stress, manage your sleep, because as you start to push your body to new limits, you start to realize that all of those things are so much more important. And a busy day at work will lead to you feeling pretty terrible during your training run that night, or even a few days later when you have to do a really long run and you haven't taken care of yourself during the week. So there's a lot of other preparations that you don't necessarily think of right away. You think of, okay, I'm gonna get my running clothes, I'm gonna get some new shoes, and then I'm gonna start running all these miles. And then you realize, oh wait, I need to fuel myself differently. I need to plan things out differently, and I need to take breaks sometimes because those are important, and not to overtrain because that can even become an issue when you really want to work hard towards that goal.
It's a lot.
It is.
It's really a full-time job, it sounds like.
Yes.
So, could you just walk us through maybe one day of training? Would you be running every day, or is most of it on the weekend?
I will run 5 days out of the week, typically 4 when I'm busy. Some people run longer. The training plan that we do, you take your week, your average Monday through Friday, and you split that up into a number of different runs that you're either focusing on just increasing your speed or endurance, or maybe you're doing something called active rest, where you're maybe not running, but you're doing something like cycling or swimming or even weightlifting. I like to incorporate a lot of different core exercises, because one of the things I've noticed as I go along is as I run longer distances, my posture breaks down, and my posture breaks down because I lack the core strength to keep myself upright, breathing well, and in good form as I run. So the more I've strengthened my core, the better I've become at running, which was something that took me 3 months to figure out. So that was a learning process. So depending on the day, if I know I have a big run, I actually am mostly preparing myself nutritionally. I have to eat a lot during that day. I eat double what I eat now.
Wow.
Because I need the calories. I'm burning them off constantly, and I need to be eating smarter. I need to eat a lot of grains and a lot of carbohydrates, and the carbohydrates I'm seeking more fruits, carbohydrates from fruits as well, not just the grains, but a lot of grains, a lot of carbohydrates that will store in my body. That's what stores your energy, because I'll use those up. And then after my run, I try to eat my protein to build back muscle and to gain muscle strength. And for a very long run on Saturdays is usually when we do our long runs, and that mileage is consistently over 13 miles starting about a month or 2 into training. Those days are pretty early for me, so I eat bagel and peanut butter and a banana, and then I carry a banana with me, and there's a lot of pictures of me with bananas running. And I'll eat along the way because you have to actually fuel yourself as you go. And then when I get home, I eat everything in the kitchen to replenish, and that's not too unusual. So sometimes it's waking up and doing the mileage is fine, but if I'm not eating well and I'm not bringing the fuel along with me, I'm really going to suffer for it. And that was the biggest learning curve for me was you can't really increase your endurance and your ability to do that mileage unless you're really treating your whole body the way it needs to be treated.
Oh, it's almost occupational therapy in some ways.
Yeah, it is.
Making sure you're looking at the whole person.
Right.
But it's been great to follow, your training, and this has been a goal for you.
Yes.
To do this, and it's great.
Yeah, it started out kind of as a bucket list thing, and it's really grown. This will be my second marathon, and been training for quite a while now. So it will be nice to have accomplished the goal and move on to something else, or just take a break for a little while.
Sure.
Everyone's like, okay, well, when's your next marathon? And I'll say, can't I get through this one first?
You'll do something else. You'll do something else. But it's been great to watch you prepare, and we're so proud of you. And we'll be on the sideline at Coolidge Corner with the rest of the
so
Brookline
excited.
Rotary Club cheering you on.
It's really nice to know that at mile 22, 23, when you hit Brookline, that there's going to be a lot of people there. That mentally is the hardest part of the race, because at mile 21, which in Boston happens to be at the top of quite a large hill.
Is that called Heartbreak Hill?
Heartbreak Hill, yeah. That's really when you hit the wall, so to speak. And you hit the wall at that point, pretty much any marathon you'd run. It's especially cruel in Boston. And it's really when, no matter what, you've pretty much depleted all of your energy. And even if you eat along the way, you're running on empty. Unless you're an ultra marathoner who does it in 2.5 hours, in which case you're a pro.
Whoa.
For the rest of us, it's very tough to keep going, because you're really just fighting a losing battle. And that energy from the crowd makes a difference. Because A, you'd look really silly just walking off at that point, and B, it's just that extra motivation to keep going. As we've trained, we've done a lot of smaller races, half marathons and such, and I never had run a race to see that kind of energy. And even at that level, it makes a huge difference, because you really get excited.
That's
Everyone's there and they're excited for you.
Great. Well, you're really living your life to its fullest, which is the tagline for occupational therapy. So this has been such a great show. It's been so interesting to hear about what happened in the past, and to talk about the future and what that's going to be like for the marathon survivors to be there. I think it's going to be, the energy level is going to be so high, the enthusiasm is going to be there, and we'll all be on the sideline cheering.
It is. We're really looking forward to it.
Exciting.
Marissa, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us
Thank
today.
you.
We really
Yeah.
enjoyed speaking with you.
It's great.
And thank you for everything that you've done.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us tonight. To find out more about our episodes, you can visit us online at brooklineinteractive.org. Our show is also part of a program called Thursday Night Live, where you can sign up and host your own show. And we really encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to share with the community your thoughts, your ideas, and anything that you want to get on TV and share to a wider audience. It's truly a pleasure to be with you, and we will see you next month.
Bye.
Thank you.